Hello class, greetings to all of you. This is my 10th video. That's right, it's already been 10. I hope I'm not overwhelming you with too many videos, but really I'm just doing my part to upload all the topics that I've been designated to for this public law revision of 2020, and then I know I've done my part, and I hope that you will in due course view these videos. And once again, I do apologize that we are not able to see each other in class, but that is something that is beyond our control due to the movement control order imposed by the government. So in these circumstances, this is the best really that I can do, and I wish you the very best for your coming examinations. The topic for today, session will be part 2 of ministerial responsibility, and I will be looking at 2 questions, and they are as follows. Now, for part 1, I looked at the 2019 question, and the answer to that is on page 1 to 3 of this handout. I now am on page 4, and at the top of page 4, you will notice the 2017 question. All right, and I've put a note at the side. The 2017 Zone A question 3 and the 2016 Zone B question 3 have a similarity in the sense that they are both about parliamentary practices and procedures. So let's read that question and then I will tell you what I mean. 2017 Zone A question 3. Discuss the parliamentary practices and procedures by which government ministers are held to account for the policies and actions of their departments. All right, so discuss the parliamentary practices and procedures by which government ministers are held to account for the policies and actions of their department. The second question, 2016 Zone B, question 3, how effective are the parliamentary procedures by which the House of Commons seeks to hold ministers collectively and individually to account? So the second question specifically refers to both CMR and IMR, right, the 2016 question, and what are the parliamentary procedures? So for the second question, you would talk about both CMR and IMR, whereas for the first question, you would concentrate more on individual ministerial responsibility because it's about by which government ministers are held to account for the policies and actions of their departments. So my answer or the information here is in order to address both these questions. So I would urge you in the exam to look and see what is the question asking. If it only refers to individual ministerial responsibility, you only refer to that. If it refers to both, like this, see collective and individual, then you refer to both. So the information here should help you for both these questions, and I'm going to discuss them collectively. General remarks, common errors, and a good answer to this question. I will leave you to read that on your own because these I have extracted from the University of London Examiner's Report in order to aid your revision process. I've also put here, normally I don't add student extract, but I've put the student extract here in your suggested approach because I'm going now to page 5. When I look at the comments on the extract by the University of London, it says it's a highly informed answer. All things considered, this was a very high 2-1. So you might want to have a look at what's the style of answering which the examiners have liked. Okay, so that's for your own information. Now, how I would address both these questions is first, under suggested approach, in your response, you need to look at, number 1, the need for accountability and legitimacy. Why does it matter? Number 2, go straight to mechanisms of parliamentary scrutiny. Why are they important? Number 3, the parliamentary practices and procedures. So, what is the convention of ministerial responsibility? If the question only requires you to talk about IMR, you focus more on IMR. So, I've got here individual ministerial responsibility, and then at the bottom of page 5, I talk about resignation as a method of accountability. All right. So is resignation a parliamentary procedure? Is questionable. All right. Because sometimes we can argue it is a parliamentary technique in the sense that pressure may be put by either the Prime Minister in Parliament or other ministers from the cabinet or from the opposition or from backbenchers. So that pressure could come from Parliament. However, resignation could also be for other reasons. Sometimes it's the personality of the minister himself. So there are various factors that affect resignation. So I will look at resignation as a method of accountability, and I will look at official misconduct and then personal misconduct. Look at some examples where ministers resigned and where they didn't. And then I will come on to, if you look at page 6, my conclusion on resignation as a method of accountability. I will conclude, and I've posed 3 questions here for you to think about. I will conclude that resignation as a method of accountability is problematic. It is not reliable. Once I've done with IMR, I'll go on to collective ministerial responsibility, how the various facets of it, and then what are the methods of enforcement of both CMR and IMR. The Ministerial Code, what does it mean? Other parliamentary practices and procedures, parliamentary questions, PM's question time, parliamentary debates, select committee inquiries, all right? Backbenchers, the opposition. So I've got 6 methods here in Parliament itself, these parliamentary procedures. Once I've done that, I might also briefly view methods of accountability outside Parliament. So I'll talk about the use of public inquiries, I'll talk about next step agencies. Although they are not parliamentary methods, I will briefly refer to them because they are also important and link it to the question. Once I've done that, I'll come to the conclusion, and by then you should also be able to answer the October 2019 question 4. Right, let's now go back. That's an overview, and we always do that at the beginning to overview the structure of our answer. Let's now go back, please, to page 5. So first, please explain that need for accountability and legitimacy, right? And if you have viewed the Ministerial Responsibility video number 9, you will see that I have emphasized that it is so important in the British Constitution because accountability means that the government must answer action or inaction for what has happened, what is going to happen. So if I were to take the COVID-19 pandemic now as an example, in the UK, the Conservative government of Boris Johnson is answerable for what is happening now, what will happen in the future, and what measures will be taken by Public Health England and various other agencies in order to address this epidemic. So what are the mechanisms of parliamentary scrutiny? This answer will argue that there are various mechanisms of parliamentary scrutiny. However, they are not as effective as they ought perhaps to be. And looking at this, I will then go on to number 3, explain what is ministerial responsibility. I will explain that it has 2 limbs, CMR and IMR. I will explain their nature. So wherever I'm pointing my cursor, that's how I'm going through the answer, all right? So they are conventions, okay? Therefore, they are political rules. You may refer to the case of AG and Jonathan Cape and Johnson, where the courts don't enforce ministerial responsibility because they are political rules. Of course, you may contrast that with the recent approach by Lady Hale in the Supreme Court in Miller number 2, where we were told that parliamentary accountability is one of the very foundations, the principles of the British Constitution, and that it needed to be upheld, which of course raises the question whether the Supreme Court indirectly enforced ministerial responsibility, collective ministerial responsibility in this decision. In my earlier videos, I have argued this in the affirmative by saying that, in my opinion, and of course you may disagree if you want to, looking at the various comments by Lady Hale, this is arguably an indirect enforcement of ministerial accountability and responsibility. So what is individual ministerial responsibility? Ministers are individually, politically responsible to Parliament for the actions of their departments, for the actions of their civil servants. That means for their policies and their decisions. The Ministerial Code, in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act of 2000, says they must give accurate and truthful information. Now, there are two limbs to this. Firstly, official misconduct or maladministration. Secondly, personal misconduct. And ministerial responsibility concerns serious defects in departmental administration. Okay? It's governed by various things, parliamentary resolutions, for instance, codes of conduct, the Nolan 7 Principles of Public Life, and the Ministerial Code itself, which is found in the Cabinet Manual. The classic illustration of this is in the Crucial Down case in 1954, where the Minister of Agriculture, Sir Thomas Dugdale, accepted responsibility and resigned. Of course, that happened more than half a century ago, so whether resignation is an accurate or indeed a reliable method of responsibility and accountability is highly questionable. We turn now to resignation as a method of accountability. Please go to the bottom of your page 5. So I put number 1, so I'm under methods of accountability. So resignation. How do we know that resignation is required? Now, the Ministerial Code requires ministers to give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, and ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. This is in paragraph 1C of the Ministerial Code. However, if we look at examples of resignations in the past, and I go now to page 6, we will see that if I were to consider official misconduct first, you will see that there are many examples, in fact more examples, where ministers did not resign, where there's even been serious misconduct or maladministration in their department. Examples of this would be the Sachsenhausen affair in 1968, the Buckingham Palace security incident in 1982, where the Home Secretary, William Whitelaw, did not resign over a breach of serious security concerns. Even worse, the Maze prison incident, where many prisoners many dangerous IRA prisoners had escaped from the prison itself, and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland said that he was not going to resign, and he said that there was no, to quote unquote his statement, constitutional duty upon him to resign in the first place. So these are examples where there was maladministration, but the minister did not resign. Let us now compare that with other examples where ministers did resign, and let us see whether we can come to any kind of conclusion on resignation. In the Falklands affair, Lord Carrington resigned. This was over the sinking of the General Belgrano, the submarine, in the Falklands War. Now, he resigned despite the Prime Minister at the time, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, telling him not to. This leads us to believe that resignations like Lord Carrington are propelled by the feelings of the minister himself to do the honorable thing, to be a gentleman. All right? How often this happens, you can take a guess. And I would say not that often, isn't it? How many gentlemen would behave in this way in today's political world is highly questionable. In the Salmonella affair, the next example I have there, Mrs. Edwina Curry resigned, but that was not because she thought it was the honorable thing to do. It was because she had no choice. She had to resign because backbenchers were putting so much pressure on her, because they felt that it was a disgrace the way that she had miscommunicated information over the Salmonella incident. So she resigned because of pressure from backbenchers. The next example that I've put there during the Blair government, David Blunkett, the Works and Pensions Secretary, he resigned out of public outrage and also a sense of embarrassment because he had had an affair with a married woman and he had intervened to have her nanny's application to remain in Britain fast-tracked through the system. So that's an example of both official maladministration and also personal maladministration, and he resigned. And again, I'm more persuaded to think that he was forced to resign out of embarrassment, really. So these are some examples of resignation. And then the second category of personal misconduct during the, and when I say personal misconduct, this could relate to both financial and also sexual impropriety. And again, if you look here, and if you look at, for instance, at the bottom of page 6, you've got some resignations of personal misconduct, but again, there's no clear-cut definition, there's no clear-cut rule. You've also got a recent update at the bottom of page 6 of examples of resignations in Theresa May's and Boris Johnson's cabinets. And you've got, for example, Priti Patel, November 2017, because she had gone to Israel and never told Theresa May, who of course got very angry and just told her to get lost and resign. All right, Michael Fallon over personal misconduct that he had behaved inappropriately towards a female journalist 15 years ago. And then I'm coming to page 7 now. The Damien Green, who was forced to resign over allegations that he had made inaccurate and misleading statements about pornography found on his computer in the House of Commons. All right, he was forced to resign. And then recent administrations in 2019, a total of 26 ministers resigned from government, and out of these, 6 cabinet ministers and 16 other ministers, that's right, you heard correct, that's 22 people resigned over Brexit. 4 ministers left government, 3 resigned for personal reasons, 1 was dismissed over a security breach. So there you have it. So what can we say about resignation? I've posed 3 questions there for you. First, is resignation an effective method of ensuring ministerial accountability? The answer must be no. For the simple reason I cannot give you any clear rules when a minister resigns and when he doesn't. It seems to depend on a myriad of factors. For instance, and perhaps the most important factor would be the personality of the minister himself, his relationship with the Prime Minister, the gravity of the offence, the mood of the party, the mood of the country, the attitude of the opposition, backbenchers. These are all some of the factors that affect whether a minister will resign or not. They're highly arbitrary. So which means, to answer question number 2 and number 3, can we say that resignation is reliable? The answer is you can't. Can we say it's problematic? All right? Definitely, I would say that it's problematic. So I would conclude to say, not only is it unreliable as a method of accountability, as I said earlier, it may be argued to operate in an ad hoc. What does ad hoc mean? Ad hoc means unpredictable, like how the COVID is operating now. In an ad hoc manner, we don't know where it's going to go next. We don't know what is going to happen, who is going to strike, right? Ad hoc means unpredictable. All right, so it depends on a multitude of political factors: the personality of the minister, as I said, the gravity of the offence, number 2, the mood, the party, number 3, the opposition, number 4, the attitude and support of the Prime Minister, number 5. So these are all some of the factors affecting resignation. We now go on to, my answer now goes on to discuss collective responsibility. Collective ministerial responsibility is there to provide unanimity of government, and it has 2 main sub-rules: collective agreement and cabinet secrecy. Collective agreement means once an agreement is reached in cabinet, all members of the cabinet and many outside cabinet are bound to speak in support of the decision. So there must be no criticism or dissent from that decision in public. That is irrespective of whether or not the particular member was party to that decision. Right? And by the same token, if a decision is reached by the PM in a cabinet committee, all right, that decision binds everyone. So that's collective agreement. Another facet or another part of collective ministerial responsibility is cabinet secrecy. Cabinet secrecy means that the records of cabinet discussions must be kept secret. All right. I'm going now to page 8. The knowledge that cabinet records are protected by confidentiality enhances the opportunity for members of cabinet to discuss them, because they know that it will be kept secret. So it gives them that protection. Now, are there exceptions to this? Yep, there is the agreement to differ, but that's only something that the PM decides. So examples of agreements to differ would be, for instance, in 1975 and again in 2016 over the issue of referendum, whether to stay or leave the EU. So agreements to differ must be decided by the Prime Minister. Other illustrations of CMR are cabinet papers and ministerial memoirs, which must be kept secret. And the case of AG and Jonathan Cape illustrates the secrecy of cabinet meetings and papers. Let us now go to the methods of enforcement. I've spoken various times and made reference to the Ministerial Code. What is the Ministerial Code? The Ministerial Code is updated every time a new Prime Minister comes into office. So the latest version of the Ministerial Code is after Boris Johnson came in. The Ministerial Code basically, whichever Prime Minister comes in, the foundation remains the same, and it basically is a document which is part of the Cabinet Manual. And the Ministerial Code sets out, if you look, the principle of collective responsibility. It applies to all government ministers. B, ministers have a duty to account to Parliament and to be held to be accountable for their policies, decisions, and actions of their departments and agencies. And if you look at C, ministers, I've put it in bold and underlined, ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. Now, few lines down, that means who enforces the Ministerial Code? It is the Prime Minister. I've put a few questions. What's the legal status of the Ministerial Code? Is it a political convention? The answer is yes. Number 2, can it be enforced in a court of law? The answer is no, because it is not law. Number 3, how effective is this code as a parliamentary method or mechanism of ensuring ministerial responsibility? The answer is, again, it depends on the minister himself, whether he wants to be bound by it, the government itself, and how far the Prime Minister will go to ensure whether ministers abide by this and whether they resign when they have to. So it's a collective effort. It's based on political goodwill. Now, let's look at other parliamentary practices and procedures. The question asks us to focus on this, parliamentary practices and procedures in the House of Commons. So, what are parliamentary practices and procedures? You could look at number 1, parliamentary questions. Now, what you need to say here, I'm going now to page 9, is that parliamentary questions to ministers may be asked orally and also in written form by MPs and peers. Now, these questions must conform to certain guidelines, all right? Yes? And in the Commons, the first hour of business on weekdays is kept for ministers to answer oral questions from MPs. There's a rota, okay? So that you can, and not everybody can just, blurt out a question and ask. No, there's a rota so that the ministerial team from each department must appear before the House of Commons every few weeks. It's cyclical. Now, what are some of the problems here? One is that because of lack of time, what happens is they go by ballot. Oh, excuse me. I beg your pardon, they go by ballot. So if you look here, there are always more MPs than can be accommodated in the limited time. So MPs have to enter a ballot. They can only ask questions if they win a slot. Another problem is lack of time. So the effectiveness of question time is that ministers also sometimes are actually given a warning. They're told in advance what notice, what questions they'll be asked. Of course, that's a little bit like telling you that you're going to have exams, but telling you what the questions are. So, of course, you'll be able to prepare for it, isn't it? Of course, you will answer better because you know what you're going to be asked. Okay. So, number 2. So, number 1 was parliamentary questions. Number 2, PM question time. This happens every Wednesday. It's now 45. It used to be 30 minutes. It's now increased to 45 minutes. The PM must answer the questions. All right, so for example, now, I've given you some examples here. For example, now, though the PM has gone into isolation because he has been tested positive for COVID, he will still, as I've put here, March 2020, he will still be under fire during PM question time to account and to answer as to what are the policies and decisions that the government has taken to deal with this crisis. Number 3, parliamentary debates. So you can also have debates on the floor of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. This is also another parliamentary procedure in which the government is held to account for its policies, for its actions and its omissions. They are also there for public interest. So debates may be started by the government, that would be the Conservative Party, or by leaders of the opposition, the Labour Party, and 20 days are allocated for this purpose every year. Backbenchers may also sometimes initiate this, and this sometimes happens for the final 30 minutes of every day. Of course, this would be also dependent on time and priority. So, as I said, at the moment, if there's a national crisis, all questions and everything would be on the COVID-19 at the moment, because that would be the priority. Number 4, what about select committee inquiries? Now, select committee inquiries are very important because they are parliamentary procedures. They happen in Parliament. Select committee inquiries are this, look at that, House of Commons Departmental Select Committees. So this is also known as PSCs. I'm just going to write that there so that you remember. So these are what we call parliamentary. Can I spell that? Looks like I can't. Let me just type that for you. Parliamentary there we are. Parliamentary Select Committees, okay? So they are PSC, Parliamentary Select Committee. So they are very important. So basically, if let's say there is a scandal in health, okay? So in time to come, there will be a Parliamentary Select Committee set up under the Department of Health to look into COVID issues, let's say. So the department sets up a select committee. Okay, so the select committee will investigate. So that's why we call it this, an inquiry. So examples of select committees in the past, and you may bring up some examples. For example, you can talk about the Matrix Churchill arms to Iraq scandal in 1992. All right, but the committee there faced many problems. They couldn't get evidence when they asked the trade and industry relevant ministers and relevant persons to supply that information. Likewise, during the Salmonella scandal, the Agriculture Select Committee, they wanted to question the minister, Edwina Curry. So they asked her to come to the House of Commons to be questioned. She refused to come. So one of the problems with departmental select committees is what? They cannot compel the attendance of the minister to be questioned, or indeed anyone who's going to be questioned. They can't force them to attend a committee hearing. They also can't force them to cooperate in the committee hearing. So eventually, when Edwina Curry was forced to come, she did not really cooperate. It's a little bit like, if a child doesn't want to go for a family get-together, but you force the child to go for the family get-together, that child is not going to talk to everybody he or she sees in the family get-together. The child will probably sit in a corner or not mix because he or she has been forced to come. Do you see what I mean? So in order for the select committee to be effective, the person interviewed or the person investigated or the person asked to give evidence must cooperate. Another example to show the problems encountered by select committees is, for instance, the Facebook scandal in March 2018, where Mark Zuckerberg was asked to attend the select committee hearing, but he refused to do that. He told the Department of Culture, Media and Sports select committees, someone by the name of Mr. Collins, that he was not going to come for the hearing. Now, what was the hearing for? To look at allegations of data abuse. Because, Facebook probably knows more about you than your partner or your mother and father or your best friend, isn't it? So the committee wanted to look into this, but he refused to turn up. So there you are. So I put a question. I've now come to page 10. What does all this illustrate about the problems faced by select committees? So you can actually in this answer say that these are all some of the problems that select committees face, why they're not that effective. The fifth parliamentary method, backbenchers. Backbenchers may also ask questions to the government, ministers and cabinet ministers, so putting them in a hot seat. But what's the problem here? Backbenchers are often junior ministers. So they're not going to be given that much face or that much time to be able to do this. So the procedure is there, but it's not that often used, I would say. Number 6, opposition. Questions may also be asked by ministers by members of the opposition who may put pressure on ministers to account for their actions. So the opposition is also very important. So these are 6 methods in Parliament. What are the 6 methods again? Let me just go back so you are clear. Yes, at the bottom of page 8, parliamentary. It says other parliamentary practices and procedures, right? If it says others, there must have been something else I discussed before that. What is that? Resignation. So let's take resignation, that you already have one. And then parliamentary questions. Yeah, 2. PM question time. So let's take this out. So parliamentary question 1, PM question time 2, parliamentary debates 3, select committee inquiries 4, backbenchers 5, opposition 6, and then plus resignation 7. So there are 7 methods here in Parliament. Lastly, what about methods of accountability outside the House of Commons? Now, I know the question doesn't ask you this, but you might just want to say that over and above parliamentary techniques, there are also the use of public inquiries. What is a public inquiry? After a scandal, sometime later, a retired judge is often asked to head a commission to look into a scandal. The Chilcot inquiry and the Hutton inquiry looked into incidents related to the Iraq War in 2003. But I've asked the question, have these public inquiries been effective in ensuring ministerial responsibility? The answer must be no, because they're not penal in nature. The reports come out, for example, the Chilcot inquiry came out 13 years after the Iraq War. So when it came out to say that Tony Blair had lied on misleading Parliament on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, well, Tony Blair already, retired from being a prime minister for more than 10 years. So it was not really effective. Isn't it? Too much time has passed. There are no penal measures. The best that can come out of that is maybe embarrassing. But the public can soon forget, isn't it? Because too much time has already passed. So I'm not that convinced by the use of public inquiries as a method of scrutiny. Another important thing that you can also bring up in your answer is next step agencies. Now, what is that? Next step agencies were created by Margaret Thatcher's government in the 1980s to basically set up agencies which are not composed of civil servants. So if you look there, this is part of the new public management reform policy launched in 1988 during Mrs. Thatcher's time. So many functions of central government were actually delegated to semi-independent agencies headed by chief executive employed on short-term contracts, many of them recruited from outside the civil service. So in that sense, central government will no longer be responsible for those departments. So these departments have also had an effect on ministerial responsibility. Conclusion. So at the end of the day, were those 6 methods that we spoke about, mechanisms of parliamentary scrutiny, are they effective in ensuring both individual and collective responsibility of ministers for the policies and actions of their department? My answer would be, well, they're important. They're better than nothing. I'm not going to say that, we shouldn't have them at all. It's important. We need them in Parliament, right? But those methods that we saw, resignation, parliamentary questions, PM question time, parliamentary debate, select committee inquiries, backbenchers, opposition, at the end of the day, they are not that effective. There are many gaps in the effectiveness. All right? So that's not a good thing. That is why ministerial responsibility and accountability has been described by the constitutional writer Colin Turpin sometimes as being more of a myth, M-Y-T-H, than a reality. Okay? So that brings us to the end of that question. That's good. I've not taken too long. That's 32 minutes. I'm going to end this now, but very briefly look at the bottom of page 10, October 2019, question 4. Discuss the view that collective ministerial responsibility today means collective ministerial obedience to the Prime Minister. So that question is on CMR only. You do not have to discuss IMR, and that means spend more time looking at what is CMR, what are the facets of it, what is the agreement to differ, what are the methods of ensuring that it works. All right? So I hope that this video has helped you to answer both those questions, 2017 and 2016. Best wishes for your revision for public law. I will say bye-bye now. So I'm going to end this revision session. I'm going to end this revision session on ministerial responsibility, which means that I will see you next for the next session, which will be on the topic of the House of Lords. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being patient, and best wishes for your revision. Bye-bye for now.